What's up, Internet, and welcome to part 9 of my Niagara Program tutorial series. So before I showed you how to read a CSV file with a program. In this one, I'm going to show you how to write a CSV file with a program. So here we go. So in an effort to cut down on the length of these videos and to make them a little bit less boring, I went ahead and wrote a lot of this code ahead of time. So I'm going to be reusing the code from the jobs lesson. In this object, I'm going to be extending it over several lessons, and the end result, I want the task that I'm going to be performing with this program, I want it to be ran in a job. All right, so to start out, I'm going to be creating a slot named directory. The type is going to be a Baja ord, and in this case, I'm creating a custom facet for it. So it's going to be a field editor, type is a string, and I went in here and typed in workbench : directory ord FE, and FE stands for field editor. And what that does is when we click the folder here to define where we want to put our CSV file, we have a directory chooser. Whereas if I were just create a Baja ord and not define this facet on it, if we go here, it would default to a file chooser, and that's not going to do us any good because I can't place a file in a file. I need to place it in a directory. So as I went over before, with a custom job, all the action happens in your run method. So that's where I will be starting. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up with a scheme for the name of my file. In this case, I want to create a file name that has a file name, and then I'm going to add a date stamp to it. So to do that, first I need to go ahead and format the day, the month, and the year. And to do that, we need a reference to the current time. And we do that with clock.time. If we search clock in our help, we'll see that we have a reference to two different documents here. The first one is an abstract class, and we don't want that. We go to the other one, and it's the actual clock class. So we see here we have a method called time, and it returns a b absolute time. So I want to create the month. So I do that with a string method called value of. And here we pass in an object, and it returns a string representation of the object argument. So inside of our value of, we're going to pass it time.getMonth. So we have a getMonth method here. It returns a bmonth. And then we call getMonthOfYear. In our bmonth, we have a method called getMonthOfYear, and that returns an integer, which is going to be 1 through 12. Next, on our day, we're going to call the same value of method, and we're going to pass it time.getDay. So in our b absolute time class, we have a getDay. It returns an integer, and it'll be 1 through 31, representing the current day. And last, we have the year. We're going to do the same string value of, and we're going to pass it time.getYear. And we have a getYear, and it's going to return a 4-digit integer representing the year. In this case, I just want the last 2 digits of the year. And we're going to do that with substring. So as I went over before, on substring, we can pass it a beginning index and an end index. In this case, if getYear returns 2023, I want to start with the 2 index and end with the 4. So the first index will be before the 2, so that'll be 0. Next will be 1. The next will be 2. So this is where I want it to start. And then the next one will be 3. So I'll be getting from 2 to 4. So I'm going to create a string called file name. That's file name with a space. Then I'm going to add the month. Then I'm going to add a dash. Then I'll add the day. And I'll add another dash. And then I'll add my year. Then I'll tack on and I've commented out the rest of the code, and we're going to test this out. So I'm just going to print to the console my file name. And we run this, and we see we've got my file name. All right, so next now we got our file name. We need to create a bord reference to where we want to put it. So I'm going to create a bord called fileord. And then I'm going to get the directory that I specified in my slot. Then I'm going to concatenate a dash and then plus my file name. All right, to test that out, we can just do another console print of the file ord, and we've got it. All right, so now we have a BORD location. We've got a file name. We need to convert this file ord to an actual file path, because Java doesn't necessarily recognize an ord. That's a Niagara function. So I'm going to demonstrate the formatting of the file path. So when we create a new instance of a file path, we use a constructor and we pass it a string representing the file path we want to use. And the problem we run into here is if we print this out to the console, we'll see it tacks on another file colon here. We actually just need this. So in this code, we're parsing the ord and we're converting it to a file path. So if we print that out, we'll see we got the exact formatting we need. So now we have a file path that Java can use to create our file. We're going to do a couple error checks. So we're going to do a try block, and we're going to look and see if the file already exists or not. So the way we do that is we define an empty file here, and then we're going to add a value to it. We're going to call fileord.get, and then we're going to resolve the BORD, and then we're going to get the component. So if this goes out and resolves our file, that means it already exists. We're going to log that it failed, and we're going to put a file named, and then I'm going to put in quotes the file name, and I do that with an escape character. So I do that before and after, and then I'll add already exists. So that's going to say a file name, my file plus the date already exists. In our catch statement, if the file isn't already in existence, we're just going to log that a new file has been created. So we're kind of using the try catch a little backwards here. So we're saying if this fails, we're going to log it. And if it doesn't exist, we'll log a success message. So next, we actually need to make the file itself. So we're going to call file, then bfile system, and then an instance, and then we're going to make file, and then we give it the file path. We got to have a catch here to catch a potential error. So if we look in the bfile system class, we have a method called makefile, and you see here that the exception we have to handle is going to be an IO exception, and we're doing that here. We're calling it IOE, and if we can't create the file, we're going to log it, and then we'll print the stack trace out to the console. All right, so next we've got the file created. We need to start writing to it. All right, so we're going to create a file writer, which is what we use to write to a file. And we're just going to set it to null because we're not ready to use it. So next we need to create a reference to our file. We're going to call it local file, and it's of type file. And then we get a path to the local file, and we pass it our path. So next we're going to create our actual file writer itself. So we do that, we create a new, so that's the call to use the constructor to create a file writer. And then we need to pass it our local file in either true or false. So we look at our file writer class, or the constructor here shows that we're passing it a file name and then a boolean for append. And basically that means if we pass it a true, then it's going to append the data to the end of the file. If we pass it a false, that means it's going to start at the beginning of the file and just start writing. So in our case, we want to set it to false because I always want it to start at the beginning. So next we're going to call filewriter.write, which if you notice in our filewriter class, we don't have a method called write. But if we go up to the class that extends, which is output stream writer, we see we have a write method. All right, so we're just going to pass a string to it. And in our catch here, you'll see that when we call write, the exception we need to handle is another IO exception. So that's what we do here. So if it fails to write, we're just going to print the stack trace out to the console. All right, so next we have this finally. So it's also part of the try catch. After your try catch is finished, you can write this finally clause here. In our case, we're going to say if the file writer is null, we're going to close it. So it's basically saying if the file writer has nothing left to write, we're just going to close it. And if we don't call this, then the file writer is just going to stay open and it'll put a lock on the file. All right, so we've got our original try block here that all this is running in. We're going to close it out with just a generic exception, and then we'll just print that out to stack trace. All right, the last thing, we're just going to log that the task is done. And if everything goes as it should, we'll run this and we should see a file pop up. And there we go. So we got our file, we go into it, and we see that it has my text in here. So that's pretty much it on creating a CSV file. As I said before, I will be extending on this in the next lesson. So if you have any questions or comments, just leave them below, and we'll catch you on the next one.